everyone, welcome back to my channel. It's Jessica Ward King, the StigmaCrusher here. So June is Pride Month for 2S LGBTQI Pride. And I myself, if you haven't been here for a while, you may not know, I am a lesbian. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about homosexuality, you know, being a mental illness or not, and what the experience is like of coming out as a person who is living with mental illness at the time. So a little bit of a mixed bag about Pride Month this month. So I just wanted to start out by saying that it wasn't until 1973 that the American Psychological Association removed homosexuality as a mental illness. Up until then, it was considered a mental illness. People were indeed put into institutions as a cause of this. And it was definitely, it hung over the heads of LGBTQ2 people everywhere. And it's actually interesting, the World Health Organization was even later. They had homosexuality in their international classification of diseases as a mental illness up until 1990. That floored me when I found that out, actually, that it was considered by the international community, homosexuality was considered a mental illness up until 1990. Now here in North America, we tend to go by what the APA says, so the American Psychiatric Association. We tend to go by what they say. We follow their diagnostic and statistical manual of diseases. We use their diagnostic criteria, and so 1973 seems a lot better to me than 1990, but the international community does not go by the APA. That's very much an American and North American phenomenon. And so, while they do use the Diagnostic and Statistics Manual in a lot of places in the world, but the ICD, the International Classification of Diseases, is still very much used the world over. And so that was really distressing to me to know that by 1990 it was still a mental illness. And it floors me because I was born then, right? So in 1973, I was not yet born. And so I'm like, that's in the past. That's in the long, long ago. Whereas 1990 is very much in the here and now. And it's interesting, the reason that it was removed from the DSM by the APA was because there was a protest. Folks saw that it was not right, that homosexuality was not a mental illness by the definition of mental illness, and that they needed to stand up and be heard at the APA's kind of general council, if you will. And they were heard, and it was removed, as history shows. Now, people from the 2S LGBTQI community have long been kind of charged with being deviant. And deviant would mean mental illness, right? It would mean there's something wrong in the head if you are a woman who likes women, or a man who likes men, or a non-binary person, period, or a transgender person, or an intersex person. I mean, like, none of these things were considered normal in the past. And that stigma persists today. where you still have homophobia, you still have transphobia, you still have anti-2S LGBTQI hatred. And a lot of that is kind of rooted in this idea of deviance, that this is not normal. So even though the kind of authorities have decided no longer mental illness, you're good to go, a lot of people are still kind of caught up in this idea of abnormality and this idea of deviance, and that kind of fuels the hatred and the transphobia and the homophobia and the biphobia and so on. And I'm going to go out on a limb here, but there was a time in my life when I got it. It was when I was coming out as a lesbian. I was a later in life lesbian, I guess you might say. So some folks report knowing from the time that they're 2 feet high that they are gay, bi, trans, what have you. I was not that person. I kind of grew up thinking that I was not going to marry or necessarily enter into sexual relationships with anyone. I was going to be married to my work. And so it didn't concern me greatly that I wasn't interested in men. I wasn't interested in women either. I was just not interested. Just, give me a laboratory and I'll be fine. And when I first had the inkling, the feeling inside myself that I was attracted to women, I was horrified. And this for me was something deviant. It was something abnormal. This was not what I thought I was getting into. And what was unfortunate is that this whole coming out experience coincided with my very first really bad depressive episode, like suicidality, going into hospital kind of depressive episode. And so I wondered at the time if maybe this whole lesbian thing wasn't actually a symptom of my mental illness, or somehow a kind of mental illness, or a part of mental illness. I wondered, because it was so foreign to me and I was having such trouble with it. I grew up Catholic, and so I was Catholic, and then here I was coming out as a lesbian, and I was losing my community, and it was a very traumatic experience at the time, and so I didn't want it to happen. And so I was grasping at straws, looking for any excuse, any reason why this wouldn't be that I wouldn't actually be a lesbian, that maybe this was just mental illness. And I remember it keenly, that I wondered this and I thought this. And as I came out and came more into myself and became more confident, and was very confident that yes, indeed, I was a lesbian, I was ashamed that I had thought this, right? Because of the stigma that's associated with those kinds of thoughts, because of the implications that those kinds of thoughts would have for not only myself, but for other members of the 2S LGBTQI community. And so I've never really told anyone. And so now I'm telling everyone. But I've never really told anyone these kind of secret thoughts of mine, other than my psychiatrist at the time, who, to his credit, actually reassured me that no, being a lesbian is not a mental illness. I still had to figure it out and come out even to myself first, before I would let go of the notionality that possibly we could explain it away. Now, I don't know if this is the case for other 2S LGBTQI people, because as I say, I haven't actually expressed these thoughts to other people before, so I haven't kind of been able to get that signal check. I would be ashamed to express these thoughts to other 2S LGBTQI people because of that implication, because of that stigma, because of that, like, I'm tarring everyone with this brush. Because being a lesbian, being 2S LGBTQI is not a mental illness. It is a state of being. It is a way of being. It is an identity, but it is not a deviant frame of mind. It is not deviant behavior. It is not. It is simply not a mental illness. Okay, so I took a break for a minute to get out the kind of approved definition of mental illness. Not one that's out of my head, but one that actually comes from a source. And I got this one from the World Health Organization. A mental disorder is characterized by a clinically significant disturbance in an individual's cognition, emotional regulation, or behavior. It is usually associated with distress or impairment in important areas of functioning. Now, none of that sounds like my experience, my actual experience of being a 2S LGBTQ2 person. There is no clinically significant impairment in my cognition. My mind is doing just fine. In my emotional regulation, in my behavior, I still behave just like I always did, except that I love women and not, as would have been expected from me, I suppose, men. And there's no impairment in important areas of functioning. I behave, I function just as I always did. Now, it was, in my defense, it was difficult for me to see that when I was simultaneously having this ramp up in this very severe depressive episode, because there were impairments in functioning, in cognition, in behavior, in emotional regulation. There were impairments in important areas of function, and they happened at the same time. So, I mean, I hope, I pray that I could be forgiven for kind of conflating the two and saying, well, we're having all of these impairments in function and in emotional regulation and whatnot, and this lesbian thing has come on at the same time, and maybe they're related, and maybe they're, maybe it's a mental illness. I didn't have the background either in what the history of the 2S LGBTQ2 movement was. I didn't know about the decree that mental illness, or that being LGBTQ, 2S LGBTQI was a mental illness. I didn't know all of that. I was just new. I wasn't versed in the experience. And so I wonder if others have that similar experience, or if it's a function of the mental illness at the same time, and maybe others who have those two things that happen at the same time have that experience. But it is it's interesting, this association of a mental illness with the 2S LGBTQ2 I identity. And that's mostly what I wanted to say today is, mental illness and being a lesbian or any other member of the rainbow family, they're not associated. They're not the same thing. I had mental illness and I was a lesbian, and they just happened to happen at the same time, and I conflated them in my mind. But there is absolutely no association. So that's what I wanted to say for Pride Month. Happy Pride, the whole month of June. Celebrate the members of your family, friends, circle who are 2S LGBTQI. And I will see you in my next one. Bye.
Stigma Crusher.